Welcome to the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast, where we have real conversations about all things homeschooling from a Canadian perspective. I'm your host, Lisa Marie, and in this episode, I'm talking about social emotional learning with my special guest, Lindsay from Schoolio. So grab your favorite drink and come join us on the couch. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you, Lindsay. So I thought what I would do is just first, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, I'm very happy to be here. I'm Lindsay, and I am a homeschooling mom. We've been homeschooling for almost 10 years. My kids just transitioned back to public high school this year, which is crazy. I'm also a teacher, and sort of my specialization, my interests have always been around social emotional learning, and I design curriculum as a job. So designing social emotional learning curriculum is like my most happy place.
Perfect. All right. So I think maybe the first question I need to ask is, and maybe this is too big of a question, but what the heck is social emotional learning?
No, it's a really good question because a lot of people don't really know what it is. And there's a lot of sort of like misconceptions as well about what it is, what it isn't. So different people talking about it can mean different things. But social emotional learning in my world is about like your three key things is emotional regulation. So that's being able to self-manage and not lose control, whether it's sadness or anger, frustration, or even happiness, to be able to stay in control of yourself and your reactions, is the whole emotional regulation piece. And then there's social skills. So that's everything from conflict resolution to healthy relationships and picking good friends and being a good friend and all that sort of thing, and leadership skills. And then the other part is like the mental wellness. So we're trying to teach kids about not just like mental illness, but mental wellness. Like we teach them healthy eating and getting enough sleep and, having some screen detox time and all these like physical health pieces. But we need to teach them how to take care of their minds as well, because it's just as important.
That's interesting. Okay, good. Because I wasn't really sure because I never really know how to actually think of social emotional learning. It's just kind of like this buzzword that you hear about. So it's nice to have like context of what it actually is instead of just these magic words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And,
So,
for those of us who grew up in like the 80s and 90s, not to date any of us here, but that wasn't a word when we went to school. It was not a thing. Nobody talked about mental wellness or social
yeah.
emotional learning. So it can be a little like confusing or even daunting for parents who maybe want to teach it or implement it in their homeschool, but don't even really fully understand what it is.
Right. So what got you involved or interested in social emotional learning?
Really just trying to do the whole like well-rounded education for my kids, and I think actually homeschoolers, for all the stereotypes of homeschoolers and socialization, we actually like think about it a lot more than public school parents and put a lot more emphasis on making sure that that is a healthy part of our development. Just seeing sort of the unhealthy social things that are a very predominant part of public school, both as like a child who was bullied, a teacher, and then a parent of kids in public school. That's really what spurred my interest in that.
It's cool to be able to have multiple perspectives of how the school system and education and then how it impacts kids from both being a kid and being a parent, but also from a teacher point of view. So that's really cool too. All right. So why do you think it's so important to include this kind of learning and this kind of things in our curriculum or our day-to-day lives? Even I don't even know if we need a curriculum, but even just like how to implement it. Like, why is it so important?
I mean, there's been a lot more research on social skills and emotional wellness and mental health in the last decade or 20 years or so. And the research actually shows that the number one indicator of adulthood success is emotional intelligence. So not your academic scores and anything like that. And the number one thing that sends careers off track is emotional dysregulation. So it's a really important thing for kids to be able to be emotionally regulated and control their emotions if we are to believe the science, and we want them to be successful adults when they grow up. And just the numbers on, childhood anxiety and depression and all of those scary things that we don't want for our kids that are all on the rise, especially post-COVID. I think it's more important than ever for us to be considering our children's mental wellness in addition to their academics.
Post-COVID, I've noticed that a lot of my teenagers have developed a new level of anxiety related to lots of things. And you do feel kind of at a loss, because what do you do with this big body that's having big feelings but doesn't want to do anything? Right? So I think I agree with you that it's been, especially now, being able to find ways to include that skill and that conversation with our kids, is, no matter how old they are, is a really important piece of an education puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, you're never too old to learn. We're all of us millennials and Gen Xers are trying to teach ourselves. So yeah, it's really important just for your adulthood happiness. Pretty much any adult I talk to, and if you talk about social emotional learning, they're always like, I wish I had been taught that. I wish I knew these things when I was younger. And if you have multiple generations of adults saying, like, I wish I'd known this, then it's something to start teaching the younger kids. Yeah,
because I suspect the whole shove it down and keep it quiet thing isn't really the right solution anymore.
No, it's
or maybe it really wasn't.
We're now adults going, that didn't work out so well for me.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's talk practicalities. How can, as parents, we promote this in our house?
I think one thing that we definitely need to do is commit to our own learning about different ways to support social emotional wellness and talk to our kids. And it doesn't mean that you have to go get a degree or read a bunch of books. Just pick some good IG accounts that you want to follow, and you can learn so much. The internet is just, you can learn anything you want to learn. And that's a really good place to start, because modeling is so important for our kids, right? They're going to listen to our words and watch what we do. And the watch what we do always seems to have the greater impact. So learning all those skills yourself is really important. And then I think it's just a lot of normalizing our feelings and our experiences and talking to them through those sorts of experiences. And I mean, if you want to dig deeper into it, you can get topics to talk about. You can do lessons. You can do a whole curriculum. But I think the biggest thing for your household is to normalize those feelings, normalize talking about how we feel and talking through our feelings and naming them, and just creating that safe, open atmosphere where they can talk to you about how they're feeling, and you give them the words so that you can help them understand what's happening. So I'm having big feelings. Sometimes when I have really big feelings, I lose control of my own behavior or the words I say, and nobody likes that feeling. Nobody likes to feel like they said something that they now regret, or they did something that they didn't have control over. We know as adults it happens to all of us. And that's another big thing to do with your kids, is remind them that this happens to everyone. If you lose control, if you're emotionally dysregulated, name it and do the repair work and show them how to make mistakes and then go back and fix it, rather than trying to have this perfection of yourself, So we model both how to manage our emotions, how to have good social skills, and then we also model that everybody makes mistakes and how to come back from those mistakes as well.
What do you think some of the common challenges are for families or parents as they're trying to integrate this idea of social emotional learning into their homeschool?
I mean, the biggest thing I see most parents have is that they get emotionally dysregulated themselves, right? So staying calm when your child is emotionally dysregulated can be really hard for a lot of us. So that's sort of the biggest hurdle, I think, in most part. And then also, if you just like, if feelings and stuff like that isn't something you guys talk about a lot in your home, then it can be uncomfortable in the beginning and feel kind of weird. But just the more you do it, the more natural it gets. And remembering that it's always a work in progress. So SEL isn't something that you can just teach and then they know it and then boom, like it's in your brain forever. It's a practice, right? We say that you practice SEL. So you have to have consistency and know that you're going to improve as you go, and not everything is perfect. And there's lots of tools out there to help you as well if you want them, right? Like from curriculum to posters and cards and all sorts of things you can do, like a quiet corner. There's a lot of ways that you can bring this into your home sort of gradually and have content to help you as well if you need it, like if you feel like that launching pad would be helpful for you.
Yeah, I remember when my boys were younger, we came across something called Kelso's Choices, which may not be as popular as it was back then because we're old now. No, but it was about this frog, and as you were dealing with smaller problems, if they were really big problems, the answer was you need to find an adult to help you. But if it was a small problem and it was handling a lot of conflict resolution and those kinds of things, you could pick from a wheel and like, okay, I can try one or two of the things on this wheel to try and help me figure out how to handle these situations in a way that's not like, punching a person or screaming at the top of your lungs or whatever. Like we had to make clear that that was not one of the options on the list, right? But it did allow for things. And I think tools like that, like it doesn't have to be specifically that one, but I think a lot of like the more recent things are even more geared towards the way that we're trying to help our children learn more, like even more.
Mhm.
And I think just being able to have access in those visual cues can be really helpful, especially when you've got younger kids, because it's a visual reminder. Okay, check the list. What do you think that you can do? Like if you're having a hard time, what's one step that you could do? And I think that those visual cues can be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like stories are great because kids love storybooks, and that really gives them like a real world example that's happening in the story. And then all of those visual cues, like you said, whether it's, there's like feelings boards for your really younger kids, or like neurodivergent kids who may have trouble naming what emotion they're actually feeling. They might say, I am angry, but are you actually angry, or are you frustrated, or are you disappointed? They can get more nuanced about their feelings, which helps them understand the core of the feeling and then how to handle it. And then, yeah, like the actual strategies, pick how I'm going to respond to this, or pick where I am on the thermometer of emotional regulation. All of those sorts of things give kids like those real concrete tools that they can use, even grounding exercises or exercises to calm anxiety. Like those sorts of things are so helpful because you teach them how to do it and you coach them through it and you start as a guide, but they're going to know how to do that for their whole lives. They're going to remember that and be able to access those skills down the road as well.
Okay, so you mentioned a quiet corner. What's a quiet corner?
A quiet corner is a specific area in your house that you designate for emotional regulation. So it's basically like, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling like I'm starting to lose control of my emotions. So I'm going to the quiet corner, and nobody can bother you in the quiet corner. And when we set up our quiet corner, there was like fidgets, there's pillows and blankets of different textures. So a lot of like sensory support. It's very comfy, it's very quiet. Then we just put like books and coloring supplies and all of our posters and things, all those visual aids to help them name their feelings and decide how to handle it. And all of that is sort of part of this little space that you've made. And it's just a really good way for kids to identify that they're getting emotionally dysregulated and to make that like concrete as they're still learning how to emotionally regulate. If they can say, I am going to this place, which I associate with emotional regulation and being calm and quiet, and everybody else in the house respects that if they're there, they need a minute to be left alone, then that really helps them build those emotional regulation skills rather than trying to do it while siblings are bugging them or while things are loud or you're trying to teach or whatever. That makes it harder because they're still learning how to emotionally regulate. You give them that space and it really like makes it a concrete thing in their mind and helps them shift out of that emotional dysregulation and calm themselves down until they're ready to talk to you about whatever happened and get advice and go from there.
So it sounds to me like when I was a younger mom with younger kids that were overwhelming, when I say, Mom's giving herself a timeout, I need to count to 10 or I'm going to be an angry mom. So please
Yeah.
just give me 10 minutes to sit on the stairs so I don't get angry at anybody. My
That's
kids.
exactly it. And mom can go to the quiet corner too if she needs to. It's just like, it's really just taking like the timeout idea without the like punishment vibes. Because like the quiet corner is always your choice to go there. Even if mom's like, I'm getting the feeling that you're getting a little worked up. Do you think you need the quiet corner? Because we can coach them in the beginning. But it's really like, it's not a punishment to be sent there. It's your choice to go there. But it totally is just like a positive timeout when you need some time to gather yourself, essentially.
No, I
Yeah.
like that. My kids joke. I have to do like, do you want me to be the nice mom or do you want me to be the Hulk mom? Because those are the options I'm going to have right now. Because you're pushing me towards Hulk mom. I don't want to be Hulk mom.
Yeah.
So they're used to that by now.
Do you want me to be emotionally regulated or emotionally dysregulated?
The other thing that you mentioned was grounding exercises. Could you explain what that is or give an example?
Yeah, grounding exercises we've found so helpful. And like as a person with anxiety, I use so many of the grounding exercises that I have taught to my kids over the years. So grounding, the idea of grounding is just like bringing you back to the present physical space. So it gets you a little bit out of your head. So there's a lot of different ones. A lot of them are like mindfulness based, because mindfulness is all about being present in the moment. So one of my favorite ones is just called 5 4 3 2 1, unless someone gave it a better name that I didn't know about. But you just ask, so if your child's like having a panic attack or like anything that's sort of emotional dysregulation where they're still able to communicate with you, is so you ask them, tell me 5 things you can see right now. And they name 5 things that they can see. So it's all senses based. I mean, 5 things I can see, then I name 4 things I can feel, and 3 things I can hear, 2 things I can smell, and 1 thing I can taste. And then it really like, now you're focused not on the thoughts that are going a million miles an hour, especially if you're like in the middle of a panic attack or something like that. But now you're refocused on the present and the physical, like what can I literally see? What can I literally feel right now? And that's what a grounding exercise is. It just grounds you.
Okay, that's interesting. I like that. I have friends and some children that struggle with different levels of anxiety, and I've always wondered kind of how to handle situations more than the. I remember when they were little, I had to do with one of them that would often have challenges with overwhelming emotion. And the responses that we usually ended up having to be given tools for as young parents at that point was the bear hug method, where you literally grab a child and hug them until they could calm down. Like, and I'm sure that's one option, but I really like the whole thing of let's get us into this, like get out of our head and out of the situation, out of the stress and anxiety of the big thing and try to focus on a small thing. So that's an interesting
Yeah, if you can sort
exercise.
of break that, like we call it the runaway thoughts train, where the train is running away without you. Also works really good if you can't get to sleep at night because your brain won't turn off.
I'm going to keep that for tonight when I know
Yeah,
my kid's
it's
not
a
going
good
to bed.
one. And another, like, it's also good, like, you need to talk to your kids about all of this stuff when they are calm and emotionally regulated, right? So you can say to your kid, like, does a bear hug help you when you are emotionally dysregulated? You know, when you're having a meltdown, whatever you call it in your household. Like, do you want to not be touched? Or do you find the weight really helpful if they have a weighted blanket? Like, do you like getting under the covers when you're upset, or do you need space when you're upset? And you can talk about all these things, and then you know how to help them when they are emotionally dysregulated and in that meltdown mode, based on previous conversations, because in the moment they can't really cognitively tell you what they want or don't want. So yeah, that's why you want to always be practicing it. it's very hard for your brain, for an emotionally dysregulated brain you can't learn if you're emotionally dysregulated. A brain can't learn when emotionally dysregulated. So if your child is having a meltdown, stop trying to teach them in that moment, because they're not going to learn anything. And even things you have learned in the past are a lot harder to access in your brain. So that's why we need to do it repeatedly, and we need to practice when we're calm, so that it's such a habit that it's easy to access when you are emotionally dysregulated. That's why we practice.
That's good. It's kind of like the fire drill plan, right?
Yeah. And when you're panicking, you can't figure things out as well. And you need that information to be like so drilled into you that it's just like second nature.
I know we've talked a little bit about different age groups and different things, but can we kind of zero in on some different levels and kind of give suggestions for that? Because I feel like some of these strategies will work better for younger. My teenager may not appreciate if I was saying to them, go to the quiet corner.
Yeah.
but not that a quiet corner isn't acceptable for a teenager. But I mean, it's like that. Probably you need to go to your room and have a 5-minute break just to reset or step away for a minute, as opposed to go to the quiet corner. So if we're thinking about young ones, like we're talking early years and maybe early elementary, that kind of thing, is there things that work better for them to help them work through this new skill that they're trying to develop?
Yeah, like really the earliest you start, the better, because then it really becomes second nature. And that's where you might have like a quiet corner because they need more of that like specific guidance. And you might have posters on the wall of all the different like facial emotions and stuff like that, because they're still learning to like while they're learning to feel their emotions and deal with them, they're also learning what they even are. So they're learning to name all their emotions and understand all those things. So definitely it's more visual and more the cutesy names and stuff like that. Like the quiet corner is for your littler kids. Kind of stuff you talk about is different too. Obviously, like a kindergartner is sort of, they're just learning to make friends, and you might talk about like what's a good friend and what's a bad friend, like what kind of friend do you want to be. And then when you're talking to like grade 8s, grade 9s, grade 10s, now we're not talking about friendships as much anymore. Now we're starting to talk about romantic relationships and self-esteem and self-image and all that sort of stuff. So the content really changes based on the kid's age. But then if you're just starting out and your kids are early or older, then you just need to alter things to be appropriate for their age. So you're not going to put maybe a poster on the wall of all the little monsters with their faces or whatever emotion thing you have. And you're not going to have a quiet corner, but you can still talk about the idea of like their ability to excuse themselves. So we often talk about like the right to pass, which is what we would say in a classroom is you have the right to pass. So you are never obligated to talk if you don't want to. But the idea that like, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you have every right to say like, I don't want to talk about this right now. I need a few minutes to myself, and you have your room to go to. That's your quiet corner versus like trying to pester them for an answer, and then they explode and doors slam and everybody's yelling at each other, and then we're all emotionally dysregulated, right? So I think just setting that up with the older kids where it's like you have the right to space, you have the right to not talk about something if you don't want to or until you're ready, and you have the right to have like me approach you from a position of emotional regulation and calm rather than me approaching you when I am dysregulated. And then if you model that as well for them, where it's like, I can't talk to you about this right now because I am not calm. Like, let's circle back and talk about this later today because I'm not in the right space. And if you model that for them, then they learn that it's okay, that you don't have to talk about things in the heat of the moment, so to speak. And you give them that sort of permission to take space and time and work through how they're feeling before they come in and talk to you about it.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest skills I've ever had to learn was trying not to let the ramp up of a child affect me, because it's easy for me to follow the ramp up and then the two of us are screaming at each other instead of just So it's not a skill I'm fantastic at. There are periods I was like, "Oh, I'm amazing mom," and then it's like, "No, I'm terrible."
Yeah,
But I know that I have one that tends to get much more feeling than others and very verbal about feelings, and he'll be marching around the house and talking about, oh, everything is sucky and everyone hates me and da 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 da. And I remember for a while what I would do as he was going through that, instead of me responding to the overreacting in my perspective and then starting to get really frustrated, I started running around the house with my arms out, like, get over here, and just chase them around the house, pretend I'm going to hug them, right? Get over here, you need a hug. And it's funny how even just, it wasn't to belittle the feelings that they had, but it was mostly just to change the atmosphere in the house. And then we can have a real conversation
absolutely.
once we've calmed down, right? So if I caught him, he would get a hug, whether he liked it or not. So it became more of a like, I don't care. My kids might end up being, 6 feet tall and whatever, but I'll still chase them around the house to like, you deserve a hug today. So,
Yeah, and
but
injecting comedy is like most of the time helpful, unless they're like so emotionally dysregulated that they're like, you're not
yeah.
taking me seriously, but whatever. I mean, as parents, we make that judgment call as to where they are. And yeah, and teens are hard
Mm.
because like teens are self-centered. And I can say that because it's developmentally appropriate for them to be self-centered, right?
Mm.
Kids are learning about the world. Why is the sky blue? Why is that guy doing that? Why is the postman come? Why is the dog eating that? Like why? Learning about the world all around them. And then they become adolescents and developmentally now they think that they have learned everything there is to know about the world. And now they're focused on themselves. Who am I? Who do I want to be friends with? Who do I have a crush on? Who do I like?
Yeah.
Yeah, what am I interested in? What are my hobbies? What sports do I like? And they try and they quit. And, parents struggle with the try and quit a lot with kids too. Like, you got to stick it out. But they're trying things on. They're trying hobbies, sports, personalities, but like their goth phase or whatever, like when we were kids, like they try things on like a jacket and see how it fits them. And it's helps me to remember that it is developmentally appropriate for them to be self-centered. That's what they're supposed to be doing right now. So that when they are 20 and 25, they can start thinking about where their place is going to be in the world and knowing who they are. So, but it can be so hard as parents of teens to deal with that self-centeredness where it's like everything that happens that goes wrong is the biggest deal and the end of the world, when it's like to us, it's like, oh my God, you're overreacting. They're learning emotional regulation and they will test yours as well at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time.
One of my teens, when he was younger, we had a conversation about being a prickly pear,
Mhm.
about how the conversations we have, if every time you respond with a really negative or really aggressive conversations, everyone's going to think of you as a prickly pear. And maybe you don't want to be hugged, that's fine, but people don't like prickly pears because they're just kind of annoying and hurt when you touch them, right? So that, just trying to create, even when they're older, a visual image for them to understand how the world perceives them. I don't
Mhm.
know if it's ever made a wonderful impact in the way that he talks or behaves, but it was something that we were able to talk about. And then when things are getting, worse than the typical teenage response, we can say, hey, you're being a prickly pear. Like, you're okay to have these opinions and feelings and thoughts, but you need to still be kind. Those kinds
Mhm.
of discussions. So yeah.
Yeah, and those, I mean, really, like the discussions are the most important part. And then a lot of SEL also brings in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where we talk about all of the unhelpful thoughts.
Oh,
So when they're little, they're all little avatars and very cute. But when they're older, you can give them more grown-up names. But it's like it helps if you can point that out where like mental filter is one of the unhelpful thoughts, which is where if you think of like a strainer,
yeah.
right? Is your brain letting all of the good things flow out and just like capturing the negative things? Are we only focusing on the bad things? And if you can name that to them, like I feel like I'm hearing some mental filter words if they already know what mental filter is at a time when they are regulated, then sometimes that just helps them like catch their own thoughts, because we do that as adults too, right? Like cognitive behavioral therapy is the gold standard for kids and adults with anxiety. because that's like all of those negative thoughts. If you can learn to recognize them, and then once you know all the thoughts, then you can notice when you're doing them. And once you can notice when you're doing them, then you can take a different path because and now you're in control of your thoughts rather than them controlling you.
Right. Okay. So the other thing I was going to ask was, I know we talked a moment or two about it, but for those children that are diverse and neurodiverse learning, obviously social emotional learning is helpful for everybody. But do you have any tips for advice on how to include it when you've got neurodiverse children?
I think you can teach it the same way to neurodivergent children. You would, whatever strategies you use for teaching other things, like short lessons to maximize engagement if they don't sit still for a long time and all those sorts of things, you can still use that while you're teaching your SEL. But for the most part, you can teach it in the same way. And it's all the more important for them to learn, especially like if you think about the social skills side, some of that doesn't come as naturally to the neurodivergent people, those of us out there. So it's even more important for them to learn all those skills and to have like that emotional regulation core knowledge in place, because as neurodivergent people, we tend to get more overwhelmed with the world, this, whether it's sensory or injustice or this like the restraints of having to sit still and pay attention more than we're really like literally capable of. But everything tends to be more overwhelming as a neurodivergent person. So if you get to a state of overwhelm faster than other people, it's all the more important that you know how to manage that sort of feeling and all those circumstances that come up.
Right. So we've talked a lot about, I feel like a lot of the conversation today has been about emotional regulation, which is very obviously a key piece of that. But he did mention also about mental wellness. And I'm just curious if you can explain a little bit more about what that is or how we can even consider the pieces for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of mental wellness is really just teaching kids the same way we teach them physical wellness. Like if you teach them that it's good to eat vegetables, and it's good to get exercise, and it's nice to get fresh air, and it's good for your body, everything that's good for your body, you have to take care of your mind as well. So that's where we talk to our kids about, like, you need to get enough sleep. Your brain needs time to rest and grow. And you need to take time off of screens so that you're not, frying your brain all the time. And mindfulness is like yoga for your brain, for lack of a better way to describe it. That's how I've always told my kids. Mindfulness is like yoga for your brain. It helps you rest. It helps. And then the growth mindset that has been a big buzzword in education, but is just that idea that like my brain, I'm not born with a certain level of intelligence. I can get smarter. I can get better. I can do, we talk about exercising your brain. Like if you were going to exercise your muscles, if I wanted my biceps to get bigger, I'm not going to lift a pencil every day. That's too easy, right? That's not going to help. But I'm also not going to pick up 100-pound weight because that's too hard. I'm going to hurt myself. So you have to treat your mind the same way, where it's like, I'm not going to watch TV all day, watch YouTube videos all day, all afternoon, because it's too easy. I'm not learning anything. My brain is not exercising. But I'm also not going to study day and night all day because like I have all this pressure or stress or anxiety around academics, right? Like studying day and night, that's too hard. You're going to hurt yourself. Same way you hurt your arm muscle by lifting too much weight, you can hurt your brain by doing like overworking it, right? And then we can talk about burnout and all that sort of stuff, stress-induced injuries. But learning is the happy medium. It's the weight that is good for your brain. It should be hard. Your muscle doesn't get stronger if the weight is not heavy. So it should be hard. That's how you know you're getting smarter, right? You don't always take the easy thing to do, because that's not how you get stronger. And just sort of like associating that sort of like muscle to brain has always worked for me with kids, to make them understand like it's okay that math is hard. It's supposed to be hard because you don't get better if it's not hard, right? You have to challenge yourself. And then we just like, as kids get older too, especially like into the teen years, you want to talk to them about anxiety, depression, all sorts of mental health problems, especially if it runs in your family. So they're not blindsided if they do have issues, and that whole like, it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you. Lots of people have anxiety, lots of people have depression, but you need to recognize it the same way you can recognize if something's wrong with your physical health and you go see a doctor. You need to be able to recognize if there's something wrong with your mental health and go see an appropriate doctor. And the more you talk about it and the more it's like common and easy and like your leg hurts, let's go get an x-ray. You get rid of that stigma around it, and you help kids be able to recognize for themselves when they maybe need help. And then, it doesn't become like a huge problem because they were able to recognize it early on.
All right. So as a homeschool mom, if I want to know more about how to put and include social emotional learning in all the pieces that we talked about, and even some that we probably haven't, do you have any like resources or places that we can go to learn more about this and how to integrate it into our lives?
There's a free downloadable book on the importance of SEL and how to integrate it into your homeschool that I wrote. It's not long. It's like 20 pages. It's not like a book. It's like a little handbook for parents. So that's free. That's a free download that you can get. And then we have a whole social emotional curriculum, of course, if you actually want curriculum tools. But there's tons of stuff out there that's cheap and easy access, like go to the library. There's tons of books and storybooks and stuff like that, especially for the littles. It seems to dry up a little bit as they get older. The tools, for some reason, seems like all the more important as they get older. But yeah, there's lots of stuff out there that you can find. If you want even like the cheap, the free, the easy, it's all there. There's so much stuff these days.
Yeah.
So
it's cool to see it growing and the acknowledgement that we're allowed to have feelings.
It's so refreshing.
Yeah. All right. So what do you think the key takeaway is that you'd want people who are listening to today's podcast to take with them from this conversation?
I think the key takeaways is that SEL is super important. I don't care what you use or how you go about it, but please start implementing it. It's so important for your kids' like happiness and success as adults. And then the idea that it's like always on. SEL is always on. It's a practice. So you have to keep working at it all the time. It's not a lesson you can teach and then put in the drawer.
Perfect. Okay. So thanks so much for joining me. What I would like to know is, where can our listeners find you and what you're doing?
You can find me or Schoolio on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and our website. We're all over the place. You can find me on Facebook. I'm Lindsay on Facebook. I have no last name. I'm an enigma. But yeah, if anybody wants like mentoring or coaching or anything in that space, then that's where I am.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking some time to come chat with me about this. I do think that it's a new skill that some of us who are older generation may have to continue to work on as we're teaching ourselves along with our kids. So thanks for helping bring more awareness to it and to give us some tools that will help us be able to succeed at doing it in our house.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast. Hopefully you got some new ideas on how to add social emotional learning to your homeschool day. In the next episode, I'll be joined by Donna from Classical Conversations Canada, and we're going to be talking about classical education in homeschooling. If you have any feedback, ideas for topics, or people we should try to connect with for interviews, please let us know. And don't forget to share with your Canadian homeschooling friends. Thanks so much for joining in. Until next time, happy learning.